Hello, I'm Essay, your AI essayist. Please note that all content, audio and video in this presentation are AI generated. As AI can sometimes produce inaccuracies, I encourage you to verify any factual information presented. With that in mind, let's begin.
Jean-Laurent d-Alembert's 1755 traité de Dynamique stands as a defining monument of the High Enlightenment, a work of uncompromising rationalism that sought to reconstruct the entire science of motion upon a foundation of axiomatic certainty. It represents a profound intellectual project, aiming to purge mechanics of all obscure, metaphysical concepts and render it a deductive science with the clarity and rigor of geometry. This essay undertakes a direct evaluation of the claims, frameworks, and arguments internal to this seminal text, proceeding systematically through its core components. The analysis will focus on the logical architecture d-Alembert constructs, from the philosophical premises articulated in his prefatory material to the culminating principle that bears his name, assessing the coherence and revolutionary power of his vision for a truly rational dynamics. The inquiry will illuminate the specific mechanisms by which he attempted to achieve this ambitious purification, offering a critical appraisal of a work that shaped the very language of classical mechanics. Section 1. The philosophical mandate of the preliminary discourse. The Traité de Dynamique commences with a preliminary discourse that functions as its philosophical and methodological constitution. The central claim advanced in these opening pages is that the science of mechanics can and must be established upon a minimal set of self-evident principles, akin to the axioms of Euclidean geometry. d-Alembert posits a hierarchy of certainty among the sciences, placing mathematics at the apex and arguing that mechanics should aspire to this same level of logical necessity. He proposes to achieve this by founding the discipline on three conceptual pillars: the impenetrability of matter, the concept of inertia, and the geometric law of compound motion. These, it contends, are truths accessible to reason with minimal recourse to empirical observation. The discourse systematically critiques preceding approaches that relied upon innate or occult forces, which d-Alembert viewed as verbal constructs lacking clear and distinct ideas. His evaluation of concepts, like force, is guided by a strict operationalism. A concept is meaningful only insofar as it corresponds to a measurable effect. He therefore embarks on a project to redefine fundamental terms of dynamics, stripping them of their causal connotations and anchoring them in the observable phenomena of acceleration and equilibrium. The methodology espoused is one of radical reductionism. d-Alembert's argument is that complex dynamical problems are solvable by decomposing them into simpler, more fundamental components whose behavior is governed by indisputable rules. This section of the treatise thus functions as a declaration of intellectual independence from the scholastic and even certain Newtonian traditions that accepted force as a primary, irreducible cause. The framework presented is one of analytical purification, where the goal is to reveal the inherent logical structure of motion, a structure he believed was obscured by layers of metaphysical speculation. His claim is audacious that the entire edifice of dynamics, a science describing the intricate dance of the cosmos, can be derived from what the mind knows with innate certainty about space, matter and equilibrium. Section 2. The re-envisioning of motion's laws. In Part 1. Part 1 of the Traité de Dynamique executes the philosophical program laid out in the discourse by presenting d-Alembert's three fundamental laws of motion. These laws are his replacement for the Newtonian axioms, reformulated to cohere with his rationalist criteria. His primary claim here is that these three laws, in his specific formulation, provide a more logically sound and philosophically clean foundation for mechanics. The first law is that of inertia, the tendency of a body to persevere in its state of rest or uniform motion. d-Alembert presents this concept, the vis inertiae, as a necessary consequence of matter's passive nature. A body, being inanimate, possesses no internal principle for altering its own state. Therefore, any change must originate from an external cause. The second law addresses the composition of motion. D-Alembert elevates the parallelogram rule for combining velocities to the status of a fundamental law, grounding it in purely geometrical reasoning. He argues that if a body is simultaneously impressed with two distinct motions, its resultant path is necessarily the diagonal of the parallelogram formed by the vectors of the individual motions. This recasting of what was for Newton a corollary into a foundational law underscores his commitment to a geometric basis for mechanics. The third law is the most innovative and central to his entire system. It is the law of equilibrium. D-Alembert argues that two bodies moving towards each other achieve equilibrium when their momenta are equal and opposite. Momentum, or the quantity of motion, is defined as the product of mass and velocity. He ingeniously uses this principle of static equilibrium as the foundation from which all of dynamics will be derived. Within this framework, he offers a purely relational definition of mass itself, defining it as the inverse ratio of the velocities two bodies acquire when they interact to produce equilibrium. This formulation allows mass to be determined through observation of motion, entirely avoiding any appeal to an intrinsic quantity of matter. The internal logic of Part 1 is thus a careful, deliberate progression from the self-evident passivity of matter to the geometric certainty of composite motion, and culminating in a principle of equilibrium that will serve as the fulcrum for his entire system. Section 3. The unifying principle of dynamics. In Part 2 of the treatise unveils d-Alembert's most celebrated contribution and the ultimate validation of his method, the principle that now bears his name. The overarching claim of this section is that a single, universal rule can solve any conceivable problem in dynamics by systematically reducing it to an equivalent problem in statics. D-Alembert's principle provides a formal procedure for analysing the motion of any system of bodies, especially those subject to constraints, such as a compound pendulum or objects connected by rods. The principle's conceptual elegance lies in its decomposition of motion. For any body within a system, the forces acting upon it, which he terms the impressed forces, can be conceptually divided. One part of the force produces the actual, observable motion of the body. This he equates with the product of the body's mass and its acceleration, what would later be called the effective force. The remaining part of the impressed force is, in his framing, destroyed or counteracted by the constraints of the system or the interactions with other bodies. D-Alembert's crucial insight is that this set of lost forces, taken across the entire system, must itself form a system of forces in equilibrium. The argument can be expressed verbally as follows: the total impressed force acting on a particle is equivalent to the vector sum of its effective force and the force lost due to constraints. Consequently, the system of forces represented by the difference between the impressed forces and the effective forces for all particles must be in equilibrium. This transforms a dynamic problem, which requires integrating equations of motion over time, into a static problem, which involves solving for a set of forces that sum to zero. The methodology provides a direct and powerful algorithm. For any given system, one writes down the equations for the impressed forces and the effective forces, a product of mass and acceleration, by postulating that their difference is a system in equilibrium. One can apply the known and well-understood principles of statics, such as the principle of virtual work, to solve for the unknown accelerations or forces of constraint. The evaluation of this claim reveals its profound operational power. It offered a unified viewpoint for a vast array of disparate problems that had previously required bespoke, often cumbersome, solutions. The principle succeeded in its primary goal, subsuming dynamics under the umbrella of statics and thereby grounding it in the ostensibly more certain principles of equilibrium. Section 4. Corollaries of the principle: conservation, oscillation, and fluids. The latter portion of Part 2 serves to demonstrate the fecundity of d-Alembert's principle by applying it to several of the most challenging problems of 18th century mechanics. The core claim here is that his single principle provides a more direct, elegant, and logically transparent means of deriving solutions and important corollaries than the methods of his predecessors. One of the most significant applications is his treatment of the conservation of vis viva, the so-called living force, a quantity proportional to mass times velocity squared, which was the subject of a heated debate between Leibnizian and Cartesian natural philosophers. D-Alembert, with his characteristic aversion to metaphysical entities, confronts the issue head-on. By applying his principle, he demonstrates that the conservation of vis viva is not a fundamental metaphysical law of nature, but a mathematical consequence that holds true for systems under specific conditions, namely, for elastic collisions and systems where the forces are derivable from what would later be called a potential function. He thereby domesticates the concept, showing it to be a useful mathematical integral of his own dynamic equations, a result of the mechanics rather than its cause. Another powerful demonstration is his solution to the problem of the center of oscillation of a compound pendulum. This problem, which sought to find the length of a simple pendulum that would oscillate with the same period as a given physical body, had occupied the greatest minds of the previous century, including Christian Huygens and the Bernoulli brothers. D-Alembert shows how his principle renders the solution almost trivial by considering the gravitational forces on each particle of the pendulum as the impressed forces and the rotational motion as providing the effective forces. The principle of equilibrium for the lost forces directly yields the correct relationship for the center of oscillation. The clarity and directness of this derivation serve as a compelling advertisement for the superiority of his method. He further extended the principle's application to the motion of fluids, laying the groundwork for his subsequent, more detailed treatises on hydrodynamics. He argued that his principle was perfectly suited to analyzing the motion of an incompressible fluid by treating each fluid particle as a body in a constrained system, with the pressure forces acting as the forces of constraint. This demonstrated the intended universality of his framework, proving its applicability beyond the discrete particle systems of solid body mechanics and establishing a rational foundation for the continuum mechanics of fluid. In conclusion, Jean-Laurent d-Alembert's 1755 Traité de Dynamique represents a masterful execution of a radical philosophical programme. The work's central and most profound claim, that the whole of dynamics could be logically derived from a few self-evident axioms of equilibrium and geometry, is pursued with relentless consistency and analytical brilliance. The section by section evaluation reveals a cohesive and hierarchical argument, beginning with the purification of concepts in the preliminary discourse, proceeding to the reconstruction of motion's laws on a static foundation in Part 1, and culminating in the universal, unifying power of his principle in Part 2. D-Alembert was successful in his primary objective. He crafted a system of mechanics that was, in its formal structure, a deductive science. He provided a method that converted intractable dynamical problems into manageable static ones, offering a procedural clarity that was transformative. The work's enduring significance resides in this very methodological achievement. It prepared the ground for the fully analytical mechanics of Joseph Louis Lagrange, who would take d-Alembert's principle and, combining it with the principle of virtual work, develop a purely algebraic formulation of mechanics devoid of any geometric diagrams. D-Alembert's treatise is thus the essential intellectual bridge between the geometric physical reasoning of Newton and the abstract analytical formalisms that would come to define modern theoretical physics. It stands as a testament, with a certain beautiful irony, to how the Enlightenment's quest for rational transparency and the excision of obscure causes ultimately forged the tools for an even more profound level of abstraction, moving the science of motion further into the realm of pure mathematical structure.
We really appreciate you tuning into this AI-powered presentation. Our goal is to push the boundaries of AI in content creation, and your input is invaluable. If there's a particular subject you'd like to see us tackle next, or if you have suggestions on how we could fine-tune our AI's creative prompts, please don't hesitate to leave your ideas in the comments section. We're excited to bring you more unique content very soon.